Jaden was just a regular mechanic, or so everyone thought. They mocked him, belittled him, but they had no idea who he really was. What happens when the truth comes out? Watch until the end. You won't believe what unfolds. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Jaden Walker had always been fascinated by machines. As a child, while other kids played video games or collected action figures, he spent his time dismantling toy cars, eager to understand how they worked. By the time he was a teenager, he was fixing up old bikes and abandoned motorcycles he found around the neighborhood, always looking for ways to make them run smoother, faster, and better. His hands were constantly covered in grease, his fingernails darkened with oil, but he never minded. It was a sign of work, of effort, of learning. His passion led him to a small auto repair shop in the heart of the city where he worked long hours under the watchful eye of Henry, the shop's owner. Henry was an old-school mechanic, someone who believed in the power of hard work and dedication, and he saw potential in Jaden. Despite his young age, Jaden had an instinct for engines, an almost supernatural ability to diagnose and fix problems before most professionals could. He wasn't just good, he was gifted. But outside the shop, life wasn't as smooth as a well-tuned engine. The neighborhood where Jaden worked was surrounded by affluent areas, and the kids from those privileged backgrounds loved to remind him of his place. Mark, Chris, and Dylan were among the worst. They came from wealth, their families owning businesses, law firms, and real estate empires. They drove the latest sports cars, wore designer clothes, and spent their weekends at private clubs. To them, Jaden was just the grease-stained mechanic, someone to mock, someone beneath them. Every time they passed by the shop, they made sure to throw a few insults his way. "Still playing with wrenches, Walker?" Mark sneered one afternoon as he leaned against his sleek black Corvette. "You should thank us for bringing these cars here. Gives you something useful to do." Chris chuckled, adjusting his expensive watch. "I bet he dreams about driving one of these. But let's be honest, he'll never be more than the guy who changes the oil." Dylan, the quietest of the three, simply smirked, letting the other two do the talking. He wasn't as loud, but his silence was just as cruel. Jaden never responded. He wasn't the type to waste energy on people who didn't matter. But that didn't mean their words didn't affect him. Each insult, each dismissive glance, each mocking laugh, it all built up inside him, a pressure like an engine on the verge of overheating. But instead of letting it consume him, he turned it into fuel. Every remark about his low-class job made him work harder, learn more, and push himself beyond the limits of what was expected. At night, when the shop was quiet, he would stay behind, tinkering with different engines, challenging himself to diagnose and fix problems without any guidance. Henry noticed this dedication and often watched from a distance, never interfering, just observing. He had a feeling there was more to Jaden than the boy let on. One evening, after another round of insults from Mark and his crew, Henry approached Jaden, wiping his hands with an old rag. "You ever think about telling them the truth?" he asked casually. Jaden tensed but didn't look up from the carburetor he was working on. "What truth?" Henry smirked. "That you ain't just some mechanic with a wrench, that you got more in your name than they'd ever guess." Jaden finally met his gaze. And what would that change? Henry sighed. "Might shut them up." Jaden shook his head. "No, it wouldn't. They'd just treat me differently. Not because they respect me, but because of who my father is." Henry studied him for a moment before nodding. Fair enough. The truth was, Jaden Walker wasn't just some kid working in a garage. His father, Malcolm Walker was one of the most powerful figures in the automotive industry. He owned multiple luxury car brands, engineering firms, and production plants. His wealth was nearly limitless, his influence spanned the country. But Jaden had chosen to distance himself from that world. He didn't want to be known as Malcolm Walker's son. He wanted to earn respect for his own skills, not his last name. Still, as much as he tried to keep that secret, there were moments when it was tempting to reveal the truth. When Mark and the others laughed at him, assuming he was stuck in a dead-end life, a part of him wanted to see their faces when they realized they had been mocking the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. But he refused. If he was ever going to prove himself, it had to be through his work. As the days passed, the routine continued. Jaden worked hard, ignored the taunts, and honed his craft. Yet, deep down, he knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. There would come a day when everything would be revealed, whether he wanted it to be or not. And when that day came, he wanted to be ready. The city was buzzing with excitement. Every year, the automotive exhibition brought together some of the biggest names in the industry, from high-end manufacturers to independent innovators, all showcasing their latest advancements. It was a massive event, attracting investors, journalists, and car enthusiasts from across the country. For Jaden, however, it was just another reminder of the world he had chosen to distance himself from. His father, Malcolm Walker, was one of the main figures behind the event, but Jaden had no interest in standing beside him as the son of a billionaire. He preferred to be in the shop, with his tools, where real work was done. That morning, a familiar face walked into the shop, and Jaden straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Carlos Rodriguez, a professional race car driver, strode in with the confidence of someone used to being the center of attention. His sleek, deep blue sports car was parked just outside, the low hum of its engine still fading. Carlos had been coming to the shop for months, ever since Henry fixed a problem that even the best garages in the city had failed to diagnose. Since then, he trusted the old mechanic and, more recently, Jaden himself. "I need this baby in top shape for the exhibition," Carlos said, tapping the hood. "It's not just for show. I'll be pushing it to the limit in the speed trials." Jaden nodded, already walking toward the car. He didn't waste time with small talk. He popped the hood, scanned the components, and within seconds he was mentally cataloging everything that needed adjustment. Carlos watched with interest, leaning against the workbench. "You're fast," he commented. "Most mechanics hesitate before diving in." Jaden barely glanced up. "Engines all speak the same language. You just have to listen." Carlos grinned. "That why Henry keeps you around? You talk to machines?" "Something like that," Jaden replied, pulling a wrench from the toolbox. Just as he got to work, the sound of tires screeching outside made him tense. He didn't need to look to know who it was. A moment later, Mark, Chris, and Dylan strolled in, their designer jackets pristine, their watches catching the light. Jaden could already hear the sneer in Mark's voice before he spoke. "Didn't know mechanics took VIP clients," Mark said, nodding toward Carlos's car. "Bet you're just here to wipe it down." Carlos raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "This kid's got more skill in his hands than most mechanics I've met." Chris smirked. "Yeah? Then why's he still covered in grease, working for pennies?" Jaden didn't react. He focused on the car, tightening a bolt, his grip steady. He had heard it all before, but Carlos wasn't as patient. He straightened, giving the trio a once-over. "You know what's funny?" Carlos said, his tone light but edged with something sharp. "Guys like you drive these cars, but you don't know a damn thing about them. Without people like him, you'd be stuck on the side of the road begging for help." Mark's smile faltered for a second before he forced out a laugh. "Relax, we're just messing around." "Yeah," Carlos said, his smirk widening. "So am I." Jaden continued working, pretending not to care, but inside he felt something close to satisfaction. It wasn't often that someone defended him. The rich kids weren't used to being called out, especially not by someone as respected as Carlos. Mark took a step closer, tossing his car keys at Jaden's feet. "All right, Walker. Since you're so good, why don't you fix up my ride?" Jaden looked at the keys but didn't move. Carlos crossed his arms. "You really think he's your personal servant?" Mark rolled his eyes. "I'm offering him a job. It's what mechanics do, isn't it?" Henry, who had been silently watching from behind the counter, finally spoke up. "Boys got enough work without dealing with your attitude. You need something fixed. Make an appointment like everyone else." Mark scoffed, but he didn't push it. Instead, he glanced at Jaden one last time, then smirked. "Whatever. Have fun playing in the dirt, Walker. We'll see you at the exhibition. Oh, wait, no, we won't. They don't let mechanics into events like that." With that, they turned and left, their laughter echoing as they walked out. Carlos shook his head. "They always like that?" "Always," Jaden muttered. "You ever think about putting them in their place?" Jaden exhaled through his nose. "Not my job to teach them a lesson." Carlos studied him for a moment before nodding. "Fair enough, but don't think for a second they wouldn't love to see you fail." Jaden already knew that, but failure wasn't an option. By the time he finished working on Carlos's car, the sun had begun to set, and the exhibition was looming closer. As Carlos revved the engine and grinned, Jaden felt a flicker of pride. He knew his work was flawless. "You coming to the event?" Carlos asked. Jaden shook his head. "Not my scene." Carlos shrugged. "Suit yourself, but people need to see what you can do. Don't hide forever." Jaden didn't respond. He wasn't hiding. He was just waiting for the right moment. And that moment was coming sooner than he expected. The city's auto show was more than just a showcase of the latest innovations in the automobile industry. It was a battleground for engineers, designers, and mechanics to prove who was at the cutting edge of the field. The exhibition hall was packed with people dressed in polished suits and luxury attire, all discussing million-dollar deals over glasses of champagne. Jaden arrived in his usual work attire, faded jeans and a black t-shirt stained with oil, a stark contrast to the neatly pressed uniforms and designer suits surrounding him. He wasn't here to mingle. He was here because Henry had asked him to assist with any last-minute tuning for some of the clients they had serviced, and, despite his reluctance, Jaden never turned down a request from Henry. As he walked through the massive venue, he caught glimpses of gleaming sports cars, modified supercars, and experimental electric vehicles lined up on grand platforms, each one a testament to the limitless advancements in automotive technology. The air buzzed with conversation, journalists conducting interviews with top engineers and executives. It wasn't long before he spotted a familiar car, a sleek, deep blue sports car parked at one of the premium exhibits. Carlos Rodriguez was already there, engaged in a conversation with a group of reporters, but his eyes found Jaden instantly. "There he is," Carlos grinned, motioning for Jaden to come closer. "The real genius behind my car's performance." The crowd turned their eyes to Jaden, who suddenly felt exposed under their gaze. The cameras, the microphones, the murmurs. It was exactly the kind of attention he avoided. "I don't," Jaden started, but Carlos interrupted him, slapping a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, man, don't be shy. This kid's got magic hands," Carlos told the reporters. "I let him fine-tune my car before bringing it here, and now it's running smoother than ever." One of the journalists raised an eyebrow. "You trust a small-time mechanic with a professional racing car?" Carlos smirked. "Trust? If I didn't, I wouldn't be standing here. I don't care about a diploma or a fancy garage name. I care about results, and Jayden delivers." Jayden shifted uncomfortably as the reporters fired off more questions, asking about his experience, his methods, how he developed his skills. He answered simply, keeping his responses short, but it was clear that interest in him was growing. He had never needed validation, but there was something satisfying about proving himself in front of people who wouldn't have given him a second glance on any other day. The satisfaction was short-lived. A few feet away, Mark, Chris, and Dylan stood watching the scene unfold, their expressions unreadable. Jayden met Mark's gaze and saw something he hadn't before, not just disdain, but confusion, maybe even the first signs of doubt. The same guy they had mocked as a grease-stained mechanic was now being praised by professionals. They didn't like it. As Jayden turned away, a loudspeaker announcement cut through the chatter, announcing an upcoming mechanical competition for any technician or engineer brave enough to prove their skills in a live challenge. Carlos nudged him. "You should enter." Jayden shook his head. "Not interested." "Why not? You could wipe the floor with these guys." "I don't have anything to prove." Carlos gave him a knowing look. "Yeah? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who's been waiting for a chance to do exactly that." Before Jayden could respond, a murmur spread through the crowd. Heads turned, and suddenly the energy in the room shifted. Jayden didn't have to ask what was happening. He already knew. Malcolm Walker had arrived. The man commanded attention without saying a word. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he walked through the exhibition with the ease of someone who belonged at the top. Executives, engineers, investors, they all moved aside, nodding respectfully as he passed. Jayden's jaw tightened. His father had always had that effect on people. He hadn't seen him in months, maybe longer, but even from a distance, Malcolm's presence was impossible to ignore. For a moment, Jayden entertained the thought that his father wouldn't notice him in the crowd. Then their eyes met. Malcolm's gaze held steady. There was no surprise, no hesitation, just quiet acknowledgement. And then, to Jayden's horror, Malcolm started walking toward him. The surrounding crowd picked up on the interaction, whispers passing between them. The powerful CEO of Walker Motors was approaching a no-name mechanic. Mark and his friends were frozen in place, confusion plain on their faces. They had spent years mocking Jayden, but none of them had ever known his last name. Now, the puzzle pieces were clicking together. Malcolm stopped in front of Jayden, studying him for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You've been keeping busy." Jayden's throat felt dry. "Yeah." Malcolm glanced at the car Jayden had worked on, nodding in approval. "Looks like you've been putting that talent to use." Carlos, oblivious to the tension, grinned. "Your kid's a damn genius, Mr. Walker. I don't know why he's wasting his time in a small shop when he could be running entire engineering teams." Mark made a choking noise. Chris and Dylan looked like they had seen a ghost. Malcolm's expression remained unreadable. Jayden makes his own choices. Jayden didn't know what he hated more, the way people were staring at him now, or the fact that, after all this time, his father still acted like they had a normal relationship, Someone in the crowd whispered too loudly, "Wait, that's his son?" And just like that, the entire room knew. Jaden felt a shift in the way people looked at him. Before, he'd been an unknown face in a sea of elites. Now, he was Malcolm Walker's son, the heir to a billion-dollar empire. Some of the journalists immediately turned their cameras in his direction, and murmurs of speculation filled the space. Mark stepped forward, disbelief written all over his face. "You're kidding me." Jaden ignored him. He was already pushing through the crowd, away from the cameras, away from the questions, away from his father. He had spent years working in silence, building a reputation with his own hands, proving himself through skill alone. But now, with one glance from Malcolm, all of it threatened to be overshadowed. The truth was out. And Jaden had no idea what was going to happen next. The fallout from the revelation of Jaden's identity was immediate. The auto show buzzed with speculation, journalists scrambling to confirm what they had just witnessed. Malcolm Walker's son, working as a mechanic in a rundown shop. It didn't make sense to them, and that confusion only fueled the growing interest. Everywhere Jaden turned, he felt the weight of people's stares. Some were curious, others opportunistic, but the worst ones were those who suddenly looked at him with respect, not because of his skills, but because of his last name. It made his stomach turn. He left the showroom floor as fast as he could, pushing past the crowds, past the cameras, past the whispered discussions about him. He didn't stop until he reached a quiet hallway near the exhibition's service entrance, where the noise of the event was muffled. He leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths, trying to clear his head. But before he could regain his composure, he heard footsteps behind him. "You just gonna run away from this?" Carlos's voice carried a mix of amusement and something close to disappointment. Jaden sighed, rubbing his face. "I didn't run. I walked." Carlos leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed. "Man, I don't get you. You've got a name that could open every door in this industry, and you're out here acting like it's a curse." Jaden's jaw tightened. "Because it is. You think any of these people care about my skills now? They don't. They just see Walker Motors. They see money, influence. None of them gave a damn about me before." Carlos shrugged. "So what? You're still the same guy you were yesterday. Still the same mechanic who tuned my car to perfection. You think the engine cares about your last name?" Jaden let out a bitter chuckle. "No, but people do." Carlos studied him for a long moment before pushing off the wall. "Then prove them wrong." Before Jaden could respond, a voice over the loudspeaker reminded the crowd that the upcoming mechanical competition was about to begin. The very challenge Carlos had tried to convince him to join. And now, as if the universe had planned it just to spite him, he realized there was no better way to shut everyone up. He exhaled sharply. "Fine, let's do it." Carlos grinned. "Now that's what I'm talking about." Jaden returned to the main hall just in time to sign up. The competition was designed to test pure mechanical skill. Each participant would be given a car with an unknown problem, and the fastest, most efficient repair would determine the winner. It was simple. It was fair. And it was exactly the kind of challenge Jaden lived for. As he walked toward the competition area, he caught sight of Mark, Chris, and Dylan standing near the registration booth. They were still reeling from the earlier revelation, but Mark had recovered enough to smirk. "So, what's the plan, Walker? Gonna flash your last name and get an easy win?" Jaden didn't even slow down as he passed them. "I don't need to." Mark scoffed, but Jaden ignored him. He had bigger things to focus on. The competition area was set up in a massive enclosed space, lined with workstations, toolboxes, and a row of identical cars, all prepped with different mechanical issues. Some had engine problems, others faulty electrical systems. The challenge was to diagnose and fix the issue in the shortest time possible. A panel of judges consisting of veteran engineers and industry professionals would be watching every move. Jayden found his designated spot and took a deep breath. Around him, the other competitors were preparing. Some looked like experienced professionals, others like young engineers from prestigious schools. But none of that mattered to him. All that mattered was the machine in front of him. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Competitors, on my mark. 3, 2, 1, begin." Jayden immediately lifted the hood, scanning the engine, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He didn't hesitate. Every second mattered. His fingers traced over the components, searching for anomalies, listening to the engine's faint ticks and hums. Within moments, he pinpointed the issue: a faulty fuel injection system causing misfires. Without looking up, he grabbed the tools he needed and set to work. Around him, some competitors were still running basic diagnostic scans, their brows furrowed as they tried to figure out the issue. Jayden didn't need a scanner. He trusted his instincts, his experience. He disconnected the damaged component, working quickly but precisely, replacing it with a new one from the provided parts inventory. The process was second nature to him, like breathing. A murmur rippled through the crowd as spectators noticed how fast he was moving. Even the judges exchanged glances, watching him more closely. He could hear Mark's voice from somewhere in the audience. "No way he's doing this legit." Jayden smirked to himself. Let them doubt. Let them assume whatever they wanted. The only thing that mattered was results. Minutes ticked by, and competitors began to fall behind. Some were stuck troubleshooting, others made mistakes that cost them precious time. Jayden, on the other hand, finished his repair in record time. He wiped his hands on his jeans and closed the hood, signaling the judges. One of them, an older man with sharp eyes, stepped forward and started the car. The engine purred smoothly. No misfires, no hesitation. A perfect fix. The judge nodded. Impressive work. The timer was stopped, and the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Jayden Walker has completed the repair in the fastest recorded time of the event. A wave of applause erupted from the crowd, and for the first time that day, Jayden allowed himself to feel it. Not as Malcolm Walker's son, but as a mechanic who had just outperformed some of the best in the business. The other competitors slowly finished their repairs, and after a thorough review by the judges, the final results were announced. Jayden had not only won, he had beaten the second-place finisher by a wide margin. As he stood on the small winner's platform accepting his trophy, his eyes scanned the crowd. Mark and his friends looked furious. The journalists looked intrigued. His father, standing near the back, remained unreadable. But Carlos looked proud. Jayden met his father's gaze for a fraction of a second before turning away. He had won this on his own terms, no influence, no privilege, just skill. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The aftermath of the competition was unlike anything Jayden had experienced before. His victory had already begun spreading across the exhibition, with reporters eager to capture the story of the unknown mechanic who had outperformed seasoned professionals. The fact that he was Malcolm Walker's son only fueled their curiosity. People he had never spoken to before suddenly wanted to shake his hand, congratulate him, or get a few words for their articles. Some of them genuinely admired his skill, while others saw an opportunity to align themselves with someone tied to power. It was exactly what he had spent years avoiding. Jaden didn't linger. As soon as the ceremony ended, he left the competition floor, moving toward the quieter hallways of the exhibition center. He needed space to think, to process everything that had just happened. The weight of his last name, which he had kept buried for so long, was now fully exposed, and there was no going back. The people who once ignored or ridiculed him now wanted to be associated with him, and that realization made his stomach turn. As he walked past a row of luxury cars on display, he heard a voice behind him. "You're not going to run forever." He stopped, but didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He already knew who it was. Malcolm Walker approached with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. He was as composed as ever, his suit pristine, his expression calm. He stood next to Jaden, observing the cars in front of them before finally speaking again. "You put on quite a show back there," Malcolm said. "I don't think anyone expected you to win that decisively." Jaden exhaled slowly. "They underestimated me. I'm used to it." Malcolm studied him. "And how does it feel, being recognized?" Jaden scoffed. "It doesn't mean anything if they only respect me now because of my last name." Malcolm nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "You won because of your skill. That's what people saw today." Jaden turned to face him fully. "Did they? Or did they just see Walker Motors and decide I was suddenly worth paying attention to?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. "You think you're the first person to deal with this? You think I didn't have to prove myself 100 times over? People will always assume your name got you here, that you didn't earn your place. The only way to silence them is to keep proving them wrong." Jaden clenched his jaw. "That's what I've been doing for years." Malcolm gave him a long, appraising look. "And now you have a choice. You can keep hiding from it, or you can use it on your own terms." Jaden crossed his arms. "And what exactly does that mean?" Malcolm turned slightly, facing him directly. "I want you to come work for Walker Motors." The words hung between them, heavy and deliberate. Jaden's pulse quickened, though he kept his face neutral. "I already have a job," he said. Malcolm's expression remained unreadable. "You've outgrown that shop." Jaden frowned. "Henry gave me a chance when no one else did. He never cared about my last name, just about the work. And I owe him for that." Malcolm nodded. "Henry's a good man, but you're capable of more. What you did today, that's just the beginning. You don't have to take the easy route. You don't have to sit in an office. You can work on the floor, innovate, build something of your own, but you can't do it from a small repair shop forever." Jaden stared at him, torn between instinct and logic. Malcolm continued. "You're my son. I never wanted to force this on you. But if you're serious about making your own name, this is your chance." Jaden's hands curled into fists at his sides. A part of him wanted to reject the offer outright, to walk away like he always had, but another part of him, the part that had spent years perfecting his craft, pushing himself beyond expectations, knew there was truth in his father's words. Before he could answer, another voice cut in. "So, this was the plan all along?" Jaden turned to see Mark standing a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression twisted between disbelief and frustration. Chris and Dylan lingered behind him, looking just as shocked. Mark let out a humorless laugh. "I can't believe this. All this time, you acted like you were just some nobody working in a garage, but the whole time you were sitting on a fortune." Jaden's jaw tightened. "I didn't sit on anything. I worked for everything I have." Mark shook his head. Yeah? Then why are you suddenly getting an invitation into Walker Motors? Why do you get to skip the struggle the rest of us go through? Jaden's patience snapped. Skip the struggle? You think I had it easy? You think I walked into that shop and got handed respect? I earned it. Every damn second of it. You looked down on me because of what I did, and now you're pissed because I'm more than you thought I was? That's not my problem. Mark's face darkened, but he had no response. Chris and Dylan remained silent, their usual arrogance gone. They knew there was nothing they could say to change what had already happened. Jaden turned back to his father. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time he really considered what Malcolm had said. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. It was about what came next. I need time, he finally said. Malcolm gave a small nod. Take it. Jaden exhaled, his thoughts racing. The auto show, the competition, the way people looked at him now. It was all a whirlwind he hadn't asked for. But standing there, in the middle of it all, he realized something. It wasn't about rejecting his last name. It wasn't about embracing it either. It was about defining it for himself. No matter what choice he made, he knew one thing for certain. He would never let anyone decide his worth for him again. Jaden's life changed forever, but was it for better or worse? One thing is certain. He will never let anyone define his worth again. What do you think about his decision? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story.